Wonder Egg Priority doesn't have the answers. For a show with such strong themes and a confident execution, it might seem as if it wants to demonstrate an ultimate purpose. We as audience members may wish for things like closure and conviction for our own satisfaction, as it often justifies the many hours we spend with a piece of media. But Wonder Egg Priority doesn't give us closure. And not only is that okay, but I think it's one of the many things that makes this show such a fascinating piece of art. If, like me, you love this show and wish to evangelize fans on its behalf, you may be asked what this show is about. And if the other person is used to hearing anime synopsis, this task is pretty straightforward. Wonder Egg Priority is about a group of four magical girls battling colorful manifestations of trauma and abusers to protect the spirits of teenage girls who have died of suicide, all in an attempt to resurrect loved ones from their past who have also taken their own lives. In the process, their friendship with one another grows, and they all find reasons to continue living through unspeakable tragedy. 2 sentences, 6 clauses, easy stuff. But then they might ask you what Wonder Egg Priority is about, and that's a lot harder. At the risk of sounding like I've given up trying, I'd like to posit that Wonder Egg Priority isn't about anything. Sure, it has messages about how childhood trauma affects people and how it drives them to tragic outcomes, but it doesn't promise any reasons or solutions for the madness. Though it addresses many forms of trauma, it focuses on suicide, more specifically on the suicides of teenage girls in 21st century Japan. Girls' suicides are different, proclaim the conductors of the Wonder Egg Orchestration, but they never explain why, or at least they never do in a way that we should trust. Girls' suicides are different is a key line, in that it drives quite a bit of discussion amongst fans of the show, at least here in the West. With its nonconformity to gender expression and beautification of queer tropes, Wonder Egg Priority attracted a huge queer and especially trans following early on in its runtime. And with it came a tidal wave of appreciation from people who had experienced similar instances of trauma that the show presented. But then that line dropped, and suddenly people questioned whether the show knew what it was talking about. I admit, the line struck me as callous when I first heard it too. So let's break it down. Girls' suicides are different. 4 words, all of them incredibly powerful, together pointing to a strange conclusion. That the quote accepts a gender binary seems counterintuitive to the show's ethos. Our 4 heroes are cisgendered girls, at least at the moment, but none of them care to perform their gender role so much as to vindicate its existence. Our main character, Ai, is gay as hell and doesn't hesitate bringing down monsters with her colorful and phallic melee weapon. Her first friend Neiru researches parallel worlds and runs her own company from a C-suite office while bringing down monsters with her assault rifle, and is also gay as hell. Rika wears jeans and a Letterman jacket to distance herself from her dainty, idolish past, and she's also gay as hell with her scissorish weapon she uses to bring down monsters. Momoe's weapon of choice is her powerfully masculine sexuality, and she isn't just gay as hell, she might even be trans. To acknowledge our heroes and the people they're fighting for as quote-unquote girls seems reductive, and to classify their actions as significantly separate from those of another gender seems to miss the point of the show's exploration of gender identity. At this point, it bears studying not only the line, but its speakers. Because Akka and Uraraka are the organizers of the Wonder Egg experiment, they in many ways control the actions of our heroes, and for that reason it might be easy to take their word as gospel. But while Akka and Uraraka tell their own story about the horrors of building artificial intelligence, they are not the narrators of Wonder Egg Priority. This show has no narrators, and its mannequin-faced puppet masters only control the game our heroes play. To simply accept their worldview as ultimate truth is not wise, especially since the reason they experiment with our heroes is because they know so little about what they are researching in the first place. Like any good story about artificial intelligence, Wonder Egg Priority also serves as an allegory to Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's groundbreaking monster novel. In a previous regular-phase time in their lives, Akka and Uraraka perform critical research into AI, and their work produces a creation who gives herself the name Frill. Akka and Uraraka raise Frill as their own child, and their unconventional family seems to live fine until they don't. Frill goes on a murderous rampage when other women get introduced into their family, first gruesomely killing Akka's pregnant wife, and then years later convincing Akka's daughter to take her own life. To Akka, Frill is the angel of death, and when a spike in suicides amongst Japanese teenage girls coincides with their growth, they determine her as the unquestionable cause of this epidemic. It's important to acknowledge that for many people with negative appraisals of Wonder Egg Priority, Frill represents the key reason for this show's decline. A common discussion point about this show is that it explores trauma as a significant source of suicidal thoughts and actions in its first half, only to pin the blame of the country's wave of suicides in its second half not on rational explorations of societal expectations and mental health, but on an all-powerful monster created by 2 mad scientists. And if that were truly the case, that would be pretty insensitive, and I don't blame anyone for feeling upset by that conclusion. But I don't believe that Frill is the show's true antagonist. And because I so rarely get to bust out my English lit degree, it is with great pleasure that I get to propose that one should never trust the narrator, especially in this show. Fittingly, Frankenstein serves as a great example of this principle. The book is constructed as a series of documents, each written from the perspective of three different people, most importantly for our purposes, the scientist Victor Frankenstein and his creation, simply referred to as the creature. In Victor's narrative, the creature murders innocent people and causes terror in the countryside, and the scientist brands him as a monster and the true antagonist of the story. But the creature defends his actions as coming from ignorance and self-defense, and he pins his heartless creator Victor as the true source of the terror. Each side presents captivating points and logical flaws, and while it becomes nearly impossible to sympathize with either, it also becomes illogical to trust either perspective as the source of truth. We can apply the same ideas to Akka, Ura-Akka, and Frill. Akka and Ura-Akka tell us that Frill is the cause of this widespread devastation, and our four heroes take their word for it because they don't have a choice in the matter if they want to save their loved ones. But there lies a problem. In their attempt to perfect the human genome by creating an artificially intelligent girl, they accidentally create an uncontrollable monster that murders Akka's wife. In their attempt to contain Frill's destructiveness without destroying their creation, they accidentally give her access to technology that they believe convinces their birth daughter to die by suicide. Because of Akka and Ura-Akka's scientific failures, we cannot reliably trust their words since they don't understand and can't control their own experiments. Akka and Ura-Akka have demonstrated in their remembrance of events that they actually have no idea what's going on. And though they probably have good intentions and aren't necessarily lying, their words shouldn't be trusted as absolute truth. Because we aren't given more solid answers, it's possible that Frill is the cause of this epidemic of teenage girl suicide and the proverbial final boss our heroes must face. But I find it more reasonable that Frill is Akka and Ura-Akka's scapegoat, and that their knowledge of Frill's power and impact is only theoretical. While it's never said outright, I believe there's a more reasonable conclusion to be had about why teenage girls are dying at alarming rates in the world of this show. And that's that there is no one reason. Remember, I don't think Wonder Egg Priority is about anything, and trying to glean any one message about suicide from this show takes away from its true purpose. Our heroes are fighting on behalf of mad scientists that promise truth behind their pain, but our heroes never find it. Ai, Neru, Rika, and Momoe all fight like hell thinking that will give them reason to continue, and once they complete their missions and find nothing to satisfy their efforts, they continue anyway. They continue because they discover friendship, and in that friendship they discovered the best reason to keep on living. They don't learn this lesson from their parents or their teachers or from their mad scientist dungeon masters, but from one another, and I think that's beautiful. I don't think that Wonder Egg Priority is perfect. The parallel world subplot is only half explored, Ai's relationship with her teacher is very strange, and there is the matter of that ending. If all of that and Frill are enough to turn you off, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. But for a while, I found myself a lone voice of positivity when the show ended, as I thought that the tidal wave of great this show demonstrated overwhelmingly overshadowed the bad. I want to celebrate Wonder Egg Priority despite the negativity. It's colorful, it's gay, it's bold, it's courageous, and I think it's extraordinary. It also doesn't have the answers, and while that may be painful to some, I think it's the only proven source of coping and freedom from pain. So, no discussion about Wonder Egg Priority is complete without talking about its hellish production, the state of the anime industry, the relationship of queer fans and queer media, and of course the ending. That last one is easiest to talk about, so I'm going to start there. I actually really liked the last episode of the show. I think it's the weakest of all the episodes, and I'm not thrilled with the Hail Mary cliffhanger, but it still looked excellent, and I liked a lot of the things that it presented. I liked that it showed Ai, Rika, and Momoe embracing their now mundane lives, but now together as friends instead of alone with their baggage. I liked the reintroduction of Kotobuki because I loved her as a side character, and I'm genuinely interested in seeing the parallel world subplot develop a bit more. I wasn't terribly thrilled with losing Neru, partly because Neru is my favorite, but also because her disappearance seems to me a half-hearted attempt to gin up interest in a potential second season. But I also had this experience 2 years ago with Hoshiai no Sora, another great show with production issues and a Hail Mary coda that left me disappointed. It didn't ruin my appreciation of the show, however, as there were still 12 excellent episodes to enjoy, and I think it's kind of ridiculous that people would say that Wonder Egg is a bad show now because the ending is bad. But I do recognize that the ending is bad because of the show's hellish production schedule, and that does warrant conversation. I talked about that a little bit in my initial review of the show, which I will link in the description, and my views haven't really changed on it. Anime should get more time and support, and workers should have living wages and respectable hours and benefits. Full stop. Hearing stories about animators going to the emergency room after sprints and crunches just to put cartoons on a TV schedule at its designated time slot is some bullshit. I'm curious about how much fans take the production schedule into account when appraising the ending and the show in totality. It doesn't surprise me that anime fans who had such high hopes for the show when it began expressed such disappointment and vitriol when the show concluded. But it still perplexes me that people can think that a show that presented some of the most captivating visuals and ideas that I'd ever seen on television can be ruined by a couple of bad decisions, especially if those decisions were influenced by a time crunch. I'm also especially crushed when I see so many queer fans express disappointment over the perceived failures of the show because its ideas didn't fit into a Western ideal of queer media. I recently ran across a tweet from user @GreatGalactica that reads, quote, "Queer people hold queer content to a frighteningly high degree that the work has to be perfect and immaculate in order for it to be considered good. And it's so scary as a queer creator to know that your own community can and will devour you if your work is not up to that standard." This was made in reference to an indie video game in August that received disproportionate backlash for failing to provide content warnings for mostly innocuous stuff, but it kind of fits with my thoughts about Wonder Egg as well. I don't know if the creators were queer, but they certainly had a huge appreciation for queer tropes in mind. And that it doesn't quite fit perfectly into many people's idea of queerness shouldn't mean that it deserves reprimand. That only disincentivizes stuff like this from being made in the future, and I would hate to see that happen. So even after the messy final episode, Wonder Egg Priority remains a 10 out of 10 for me. At this point, it's one of my 5 favorite shows of all time, though I recognize that might be recency bias talking, and I fully expect it to drop at some point. If it's not a 10 out of 10 for you, that's fine. I just ask it that it be for understandable reasons.